Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Binary Life. Today, we're going to solve a series of labs regarding network policies on Kubernetes. And before we start, what do we need to know about network policies? Network policies is a way to filter traffic between pods so that we allow or disallow what we want to allow or disallow. So let's follow the lab and answer the questions progressively. Now, how many network policies do we have in this environment? Before I answer that question, you can see that the circles on this diagram below are ports actually, and the squares on top of them are the ports exposed on those containers or ports, so the necessary for them to be accessed externally. This is somebody's head, so this is the user, and is it polygon or whatever. This is a network policy. So how many network policies do we have so far? We can check that by typing capctl get network policy in one word without space. So we have one. Now, what is the name of the network policy? The name is right here. Payroll policy is one. Which port is the network policy applied on? We can check that in two ways. So we can do this, get network policy. Let me recall that and get the policy name. Nope, not that. I probably have to take describe, and we can see that it is associated to a port here. This is the selected port. The name of that port is payroll. Another way to see that is by doing the get that I did before and displaying the output in YAML format, and somewhere where we have the specification for the policy, we can see that it's somewhere here, port selector here. This policy is bound to the port called payroll. Now this is the port payroll here. So which port in the network policy applied on the payroll port? Next question, what type of traffic is this network policy configured? Now we can come back here. This is it, is the ingress traffic here. And if I go back to the previous view, in the describe view, it's also somewhere here, ingress traffic. So I want to pick index ingress. What is the impact of the role? So it's written here clearly, it allows ingress traffic from the port internal. So traffic from internal to payroll. Remember, this network policy is tied to the payroll. So this means the payroll is allowing traffic from internal. So traffic from internal to payroll is allowed. This is it here. What is the impact of the rule configured on the network policy? External port can ping the role, internal port can ping the payroll. Yes, internal port can actually ping the payroll. Internal port can, let's see, can it actually ping? I'm not sure, because this is the port that is exposed, port 8080, which is a web port. So internal port can access port 8080 on payroll. This is the most accurate one. Check. Okay, now access the UI of this application using the link above the terminal. This is of these applications. So here we have 4 applications. We have external, internal, payroll, and the DB. But right here, just 2 of them are exposed on this platform. We have internal and external, so let's open those two. This is external with red color and this is internal with blue. Okay, this is great. Next question. Perform a connectivity test using the user interface of these things here. To access the payroll. So this is the payroll in the middle here. We're going to access it from the internal port and from the external. And how do we do that? Normally these are ports, so we can actually use port names. But for that, I need to check to qualify and testify what is the name of the port really. The payroll port is actually called payroll. So here we can use host name. So let's say payroll here. Access with port 8080. Name does not resolve, so we have a problem of name resolution. I'm just going to go with IP addresses. So this port is eventually exposed with the service, so I'm going to get the list of services. I can type services like this, or I can use the shortcut SVC. Now the payroll service is exposed via the node port, and this is the IP address. So I'll access the node port using this IP. Let's see how that goes. And we have a success. I'll also access the payroll from the external port on port 8080. We have a timeout, so this external port cannot access this one. Meanwhile, the internal can access. I think it is because of this ingress, yeah, which can only allow ingress traffic from the internal. So it blocks the external from accessing this port. So we can respond by saying only the internal application can access the payroll. Now perform a connectivity test using the user interface of the internal to access the external. So what about these two ports? The red and the blue, the external and the internal. Let's come back to our port list. I'm going to get the external IP address here and go into the internal port and try to access it. It works. We still have success. I can refresh and restart. So that's great. Internal can access external. I can even test the reverse way. So let's take internal IP and query it from the external here. It works. All right, so successful. So create a network policy to allow traffic from the internal application only to the payroll and DB. So this is it practically. So we want to, oh, my lab just went off. Let's just retry again. I'll refresh the whole thing. Sorry about that. I'll relaunch the lab. This is not cool. The way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing. Okay, we are back to the lab. We're going to go straight to where we were. So there was one if I remember well, there was one network policy and it was tied to payroll. It was called payroll, and then it was attached to the payroll port, and it was allowing network ingress traffic, and what can we have? We can have it here, even representation using graphical interface. So traffic from internal to payroll was allowed. That's it. Specifically on port 8080 here. And then we access the connectivity apps here, which is still on. And then we try to ping this payroll from both internal and external. Although the internal was doing the ping successfully. And then we tried to ping internal and external among the two among themselves. We had just successful response. And finally, the last exercise, we had to configure something like this: a network policy such that internal can only access the payroll and the DB, but it couldn't access the external. So from the point of view of the internal port, this will be egress traffic because it's coming out of the port. Remember, we do it from the point of view of the source traffic. The source traffic comes from here. This is where the user is. So when it enters this port, everything that comes out this way is egress traffic. So we need to configure a network policy for egress traffic, allowing this port to be able to access just the payroll and the DB, but not the external port, which means the external could probably access the internal but not the reverse. I think so. Okay, so I'll go to the documentation. Let's go to Kubernetes and let's look at the documentation on configuring network policies. I'll type network policy. And I'm going to copy all of this, and then we're going to convert it progressively. Right, that's okay. I'm going to create a file called my resource, my policy, something like that. The YAML. Let's paste. So we are going to do just egress traffic. So I'm going to come to you can see my cursor. Okay. Let's start with the name of the network policy. According to the exercise, we want it to be called internal policy. Internal, and then we want it to allow just egress traffic, so we're going to remove ingress from here. All right, and then we're going to convert this to egress, and since we can't have two egress sessions, I'll remove this second part here. Things like about 7 lines. I'll delete all of that. Okay, so we want to allow traffic not from but to somewhere. Remember, it's egress, so it's coming out of the port is 2. And we have two types of traffic. We have one traffic going to port 8080 to this port, and another one to port 2306 on this port. And we know this port's name and we know this port's name, so it's gonna be port selector. So I'm going to remove, we're not filtering anything from namespaces, so I'll remove this line. We're not filtering IP addresses, so I'll remove this line too. So I'll start by removing IP address, and then I'll remove namespace selector and we'll stick to port selector. And since we know the port's name, we'll just give it the name here. Allow traffic to port payroll, and port payroll is on port expose on port 8080. So I'm going to copy this and let's repeat again the whole process. We'll allow another traffic on port, that's for DB, this is DB here. If you don't know the name of the port, you can go and do a kubectl get port to get the name of the port. It's because I know that I'll call it MySQL, but we're going to verify it shortly, which is on port 3306. Right, I'm going to save this and display the file so that we can see the content and display the list of ports. So this is the name of the database port. That is why I knew that it's called MySQL. And the payroll, it's here. I think we're not done. We need to tie this policy. We need to tie this policy to the internal port. So I'll go back to the file. I'm going to select the port to which we want to tie this policy. We know the port's name is called internal, so I'll remove role here and put name. So this policy is tied to the internal port, like we can see here, surrounding the internal port, and it allows traffic, egress traffic to the payroll on this port and to the database on this port. So I'm going to save all of these, and kubectl, we're going to apply all of that created, and I'm going to check everything is okay. And oops, I had to end the lab, but before that I was supposed to have checked if the external can ping the internal again. Normally it's not supposed to do that. Let's see if the internal can ping the external. Let's try that. Of course it's not working because of the network policy. Okay, so thanks for viewing. More exercises are coming for Kubernetes practice session on different sections of the exam and certification, and don't forget to subscribe to get notified on new updates. Thanks for viewing.